Welcome to part 4 of my Summoner's Guide in Divinity Original Sin 2. Now that we have covered the skills, which are the tools that help you annihilate every enemy in the game, let's move on and talk about how to use these tools. It's time to cover combat strategies and combos. For area of effect casters like our Burst Summoner, battles can roughly be broken down into 3 phases. First, we have the preparation phase. Here you do everything that's possible to help you before the combat starts. Cover the battlefield with elemental puddles for your affinity talent and to have access to the totems or the incarnate of the preferable type. Use the bedroll for a team-wide well-rest effect and cast necessary buffs, and of course, summon and infuse your incarnate. Another step of a good preparation is to create a beneficial combat initiation. Here you will go for an ambush tactic, wasting enemies' attacks by manipulating turn order and saving up your action points to get a devastating alpha strike. In the second phase, you are gathering all the enemies in one place to prepare them for your combos. And finally, in the third phase, burst the enemies down. Single target physical damage builds would be going more for a one-by-one approach, utilizing the executioner talent, but that's not where the strength of a burst summoner is. For all the preparation we need, we should make sure that if we hit as many as possible. One of the strengths of a summoner lies in the preparation phase. We can cast spells that are worth a lot of action points before the fight even has started. So let's get into the details. Creating affinity surfaces. Bone Widows, Totems of the Necromancer, probably Bloodstorms, Mass Fire Traps, Poison Aura, Living on the Edge are all spells that you will cast very often later on. All of them cost more than 1 action point and can be reduced by 1 if you stand on an elemental surface of the same type while casting it and have taken the elemental affinity talent. If you know that a fight is happening at a location, you should cover multiple spots with affinity surfaces that you might need. If you are surprised from an enemy and couldn't prepare beforehand, it still can often be better to prepare the battlefield with affinity surfaces for your bigger combos, even if you are already in combat, especially later in the game. This will waste an entire turn from you, but your good combos will often require a limited affinity to be so deadly. As long as you have spells that can delay the combat like Chameleon Cloak or Play Dead, you have time for preparation. The spell for creating blood is Blood Rain. It can be crafted by combining Necro and Hydro books. Blood is one of the more persistent surfaces compared to oil and poison, which will quickly explode and turn to fire during most combats. So most of the time we will have easy access to it. Alternatively, elves can use their racial ability to create a small blood pool for the affinity. Hydro Surface surfaces are as easy to manage as blood surfaces. There are no spells from Hydro that we typically need for a burst summoner, but if you are playing a Hydro hybrid summoner build, the rain spell is the way to go. Since water doesn't explode either, you can cover the entire area if you want to, giving you easy access for your affinity. Aero Surface needs electrified water or blood. This is the most annoying surface for elemental affinity. Like fire, it lasts for only 2 turns, so you can't drop it somewhere and hope it will still be electrified when the combat starts. Electrified surfaces will kick you out of invisibility if you are not completely immune, so having a large area covered has its drawback for your defensive options. If your magic armor is reduced by an attack, the surface can stun you, like all enemies in it, removing the surface in the process. If you want to play a hybrid Aero summoner, then of course you have to deal with it. The best way to have easy access to lightning surfaces all the time is learning lightning infusion for your incarnate, and when it's your incarnate's turn, let it punch the water on the ground and the entire surface will be charged again. After that, cast a totem on the surface. If there are no enemies in range of the totem but the combat is still active and the ground is not electrified anymore, the totem will re-electrify the ground for you. Luckily, aside from the Aero hybrid situation, the only Aero spells with more than 1 action point cost we need is Teleport. And since we will be using Teleport during our gathering phase, where we don't need to plan for every single action point like in our burst phase, it's not worth the hassle to create a surface just for it. Geomancy is easy to prepare but difficult to keep. Because all poison and oil surfaces are flammable, and everything in this game seems to love setting things on fire, the worst idea you can have is creating a large poison or oil surface like you could with water. One small spark, which will happen pretty much always, and every single square on the ground is inaccessible for your Earth affinity. Everything burns. The better idea is sprinkling small dots from poison darts or fossil strike with at least 4 to 5 meters distance between them, so when something explodes you still have backup affinities. Cast 1 or 2 a little bit farther away from the central fighting space, you might need them when everything explodes. As a summoner, we can utilize this for Warm Tremor when gathering enemies via teleport, or later during our totem combo for Poison Aura, or for our artillery plant, if you like to use that. Geo Summoner hybrids will of course have more uses. Pyro fields are so dominant in this game that in a lot of cases you don't need to create these for your affinity, the enemies will do that for you. And if you need one before a fire trap combo, there's a lot of options for one action point, or run with a fire incarnate and let him cast Fireball before you do your thing. Good spells for affinity are Ignition if you are already standing on oil or poison, Bleed Fire or Searing Dagger for 2 points but can create 3 separate surfaces. The explosion from Wind Up Toy as well as Fire Trap on an oil surface works too. Pre-summoning. One of the strongest aspects of your incarnate is that it lasts 10 turns. That means you have time to prepare it and send it into the battle fully infused. If you play with more than one summoner, this part of our playstyle can quickly give you such a heavy advantage that many fights can be won by pre-summoning multiple incarnates and just overrun your enemies. At this point, we have the option to use a really cheesy tactic. The normal behavior would be to just join your incarnate after he has initiated the fight. But you can just decide to stay out of the battle, resummon your creature whenever it falls and then send it in again. Multiple summoners can just replace the fallen minions while standing outside in real-time mode. From a role-playing perspective, that might give you the feeling of a true summoner who let its creatures do the dirty job. But be warned that using this tactic can get really boring. It can really trivialize some interesting battles. If you don't have the option to summon the incarnate before the battle, it's worth considering skipping the incarnate altogether and focus on situational pets like the spider and the burst pets. Engaging the enemy. After your creature is ready for the fight, it's time to begin the battle and create a combat situation where you have all the advantages. First, you send in a single incarnate, not all of them if you have more than one. Keep enough distance with your character that he will not join the fight. If one enemy has higher initiative than your incarnate, it will most likely take a hit. Since it's the only character in the battle from your side, and it will always be the second one on the list to act. Now it's time to manipulate the enemy's field of view cones. Your first move with the incarnate will be to get into a position where all enemies will look away from your team, so they can sneak around the battlefield freely without activating the fight. You can use teleport for that, but you will only learn warp infusion at the end of Act 2, so your pet has to use its legs for a while. To make all the enemies look at your incarnate, you have to end the turn on the target position without being invisible. There is a good chance that your incarnate is not able to survive one full round of attacks. Before it takes its first move, you can put your character close enough to cast one or more defensive spells on it without joining the fight. Living on the Edge, Armor of Frost, and Fortify don't trigger the combat for your character when cast on your pet. You can safely do that from a little bit of distance. If you have Living on the Edge, you don't need any other spell for that. After surviving the first round, the next thing you have to do is get him to the end of the turn order. If he doesn't have Living on the Edge on him, and you don't think he will survive a delayed turn action, he could also cast Chameleon Cloak from the Shadow Infusion spell. If you have Living on the Edge applied, delay your turn directly. Otherwise, cloak and then end your turn. On your next turn, delay your turn. Either way, you will be the last one on the list now and have saved up 6 action points and all enemies are looking in your direction. If you mess up and your incarnate dies, we go back to the pre-summon phase and repeat. As a general rule, all your entities that join the fight, aside from your summoning spells during the battle, will always be the last on the list. Because our incarnate has wasted all the enemy's actions against him already while being protected by death resist or invisibility, you can send in all the remaining incarnates now. So technically, all of them will get one bonus turn. If you want to, you can resummon the first wounded incarnate and replace it with a fresh one. The other incarnates will hold the battle frozen in time for you, till your replacement has arrived. This is only possible with multiple summonings, or if you send in a character from your team as a time freezer. Now, when all the creatures are in place, it's time for the next phase. Pre-buffing. This is another part of your preparation phase. Like the incarnate infusions, there are a lot of buffs that can make your pet better for a couple of rounds. Most of them are useful, but are almost not worth taking or casting when the battle has already started. When the incarnates are all in position on the border of the aggro range, it's time to use all the buffs from any character, no matter if summoner or not, and throw them on our frozen incarnates. Some buffs will count as aggressive action and will force the caster to participate in the fight even when cast from outside the aggro range. Some you can use safely. If you really want the combat mode enabling buffs on your incarnate, you can cast them and then cast teleport with another character on the buffer who was drawn into combat and move him away from the battle a couple of meters, and he will be removed from the fight so he can keep doing his buffing work. If all of this is not cheesy enough for you, we can go one step further. If you have at least one character with a glass cannon talent, you can use him as a source battery for your other characters before the fight. So the other characters can buff your incarnate with Cursed Infusion for 2 source points each, and then use Source Vampirism to drain your glass cannon to refresh themselves. After he's empty, teleport him with your pyramid to the next source fountain of your local area, fill him up and teleport him back. Rinse and repeat. The teleportation will unsummon his pets, so only 3 characters can have incarnates with pre-buffed curse infusions. Now you should have 1 or more incarnate, completely buffed up, in position and last in turn order, and all enemies are looking away from your team. It's time now for your characters to join the battle. The first attack from outside of battle mode is free and doesn't count as your first action. We use the teleport spell with every character to move enemies into the same spot while entering the fight. If you have done everything right, you have all your incarnates fully buffed, all your characters on high ground, and depending on your group size, a lot of enemies gathered on one spot, and all of them can take one action before the first real round of combat starts. This ends your preparation phase. Phase 2. Gather enemies. This is a relative straightforward step, but a necessary one to maximize your burst potential. Most of your really hard-hitting combos are either area attacks or scale with the number of enemies nearby. You don't want the enemies spread out. The first method is the classical method, which all casters should be familiar with. Use teleport and nether swap to get as many enemies as possible into one small spot. Nether swap works like teleport, except it costs only 1 action point but needs 2 targets to swap positions with. Luckily, as a summoner, we can always create a bone spider or a totem as a proxy for the teleport target at the position we want our target to be after swapping. This is easier said than done. If you just use it on the next enemy in front of you, it will probably move away before you are done piling them up. There are 3 ways of preventing enemies from running away before your burst phase. The first is simple. Look at the action list which enemies have already done their turn and will not move anymore, then teleport them to another enemy who will not move so soon. This method has its limit. Sometimes the only viable teleport targets will take their action right after you, making it nonsensical to teleport them now. An easier way is using the same method we used in the preparation phase to get our characters and pets to the end of a list. Get them temporarily out of the fight with invisibility or play dead, and then delay turns until all of your teleport casting characters are last in the turn order. Now you can teleport the enemies around without any unwanted movement. At this point, you could go straight into the burst phase if 1 turn on each of your characters is enough to pile the enemies up and then burst them down before they can act again. If you need more time for nuking, it's good to have Torturer and Warm Tremor on one or more characters. You can completely lock the enemies down so they can't run away. This works against almost all enemies in the game, aside from 1 or 2 exceptions. I can't emphasize enough how easy this spell makes creating big piles of soon-to-be-dead enemies. That being said, it's possible that your build just doesn't have room for that, and in that case, we can do it the Summoner's way. We need some sort of invisibility and the Living on the Edge spell. It's pretty simple. Use your Incarnate or quickly summon a Bone Spider and cast the Death Protection on it. Make all your characters invisible and then fight with your summon till the effect ends or it dies. Attack ranged enemies with it so the melees will follow you to them. This doesn't work well with the play dead effect because the pet will most likely die in the process and the fight will reset. After that, the enemies will all be close together. Not as close as you can get them with teleport, but close enough to create a massacre with your Totems of the Necromancer's combo or burst at least a couple of them with fire traps. This way, you can save yourself a couple of memory slots and a talent from not taking teleport in Netherswip and Warm Tremor. In the next part, we are taking a deep look into the Summoner's Manual of how to make enemies go boom.